In today's show, we're jumping into the first video of a 3-video series in which we teach you how to master the control and adjustment of color inside of Lightroom Classic. Hey everyone, welcome into Magnolia Photography SC. I'm Jeff House, and I'm a wildlife photographer in Charleston, South Carolina. You know, I've been a professional photographer a long time, and there is always one topic in my experience that tends to cause a lot of fear, a lot of stress, and also a lot of confusion. And that is, how do we adjust and control our colors inside of Lightroom Classic? Right? When we're editing our photos, of course, we want to have beautiful looking colors that just kind of pop off the page, right? Or pop off the screen. We want those beautiful, rich colors, but we also want accurate colors, and we want to know how we can manipulate these colors to achieve these goals. Well, that's what this video series is going to be aimed at doing. It's going to be aimed at demystifying all of the issues and problems that come with adjusting and controlling color inside of Lightroom. And by the time these videos are done, you guys are going to be well on your way to having this mastered. Now, I was going to do this in one video, but I decided against that because, one, I think the video would be at least an hour and a half long. I think it would be overwhelming with all of the information being squished into one lesson. And so I decided to break it up into more bite-sized pieces that will be much easier to digest and learn. And I think in the long run, that'll be much more beneficial for you guys in actually applying the tools and tips that I'm going to show you. Now, over the course of the next 3 videos, we are going to focus on 3 different tools inside of Lightroom, and they are all of the tools that allow us to control color. But the big ones that we're going to focus on in video 1 are the color mixer and color point panel. In the second video, we're going to be talking about the calibration panel. And in the third and final video, we are going to be talking about the color grading panel. Now, each of these provides a little different functionality and allows us to accomplish some different things. We will explain all of that over the course of these videos. So what I want to do now, guys, is I want to jump into Lightroom and I want to get started on this lesson of learning the color mixer and the color point tool. All right, guys, welcome into Lightroom Classic. The first thing that you're going to see here is that we have a little bit of a color grid up here with some blues and greens and magentas. And this is going to be really helpful in understanding how these tools impact color as we go through this lesson. Now, before we jump into the color mixer and the point color tool, I want to talk about a couple of other tools that can have an impact on color. And these are probably tools that you're more familiar with if you've done any kind of photo editing. But when we come into the develop mode to do our editing inside of Lightroom Classic, the first panel that we're going to have is the basic panel. And this is probably what you're very familiar with, right? This is where we do our exposure and our whites and our blacks and our highlights and all of those great things. This is also where we do white balance, right? And if we really understand white balance, what we know is that if we look at this slider, we see that there's blue to the left and yellow to the right, meaning anytime we take that slider to the left, we are going to add more blue into our photo and we're going to make it feel cooler. When we go to the right, we're going to add more yellow into our photo and we are going to make it feel warmer. Well, how does this really apply to real life photo editing? Well, of course, if you are currently somewhere where there's a lot of snow on the ground and it's cold, typically cool and blue are associated with the winter time or the winter months. So if you were out taking a picture of some wildlife right now out in the snow, you would likely want to hedge that slider for your white balance towards the blue side, because that would align with the lighting and the vibe of a picture that's taken during the winter months with snow on the ground. But if you're somewhere warm and the sun is out and the grass is green and you kind of just have that summer feel to it, you're going to want to hedge that slider to the right, where you're going to add some yellow into it and some warmth into your photo, because again, that warmth is going to support the environment and the vibe that's going on in the photo. So that's how we're going to use our white balance. But let's see what happens to the colors as we add coolness and warmth into them. So if I click this slider and go left to the cool side, you can see the colors are all becoming much cooler feeling. But if I go to the right to the yellow, you can see that now we're bringing colors in that have a lot more warmth to them. So this is how white balance can impact color, but we can see that happening as we make that shift from the cool side to the warm side. We're just going to double click that slider and it will reset it to 0. And you can do that anytime in Lightroom. Let's go down to vibrance and saturation. You hear me talk a lot about these two sliders, and I've mentioned it a lot in previous videos that I've done. But vibrance is a way to boost colors, as is saturation. The difference is that vibrance does it in a more subtle way. And vibrance is personally my tool of choice because I feel like it gives us a lot more control over the boosting of our colors in our images. Saturation is something that happens more rapidly and more harshly. And it's very easy when using saturation to get it to a level that really would be considered too high, and it creates our colors to become oversaturated. And when they cross that point of going into oversaturation, they become very ugly. Very, very ugly, and it really degrades the overall quality of your photo. So you got to be very cautious when using saturation. And you do need to use some caution with vibrance as well, but it's something that will give you a lot more room for error when compared to saturation. But let's take a look at how this works when we move these two sliders either left or right. And I want you to take notice of what happens especially when we take the vibrance all the way down to the left and take color out compared to when we do this with saturation. So if we take the vibrance slider and go all the way to the left and we remove color, you can still see that we have color in all of the squares on our page here. But of course, we can all agree these colors are far less beautiful, right? They're much more muted in their tones. They're not very attractive. If we go all the way to the right, now we get very bright and vibrant colors. Now this is overdone a little bit, right? This would be crossing the line of having too much boost to the colors, but we could back it off and we could certainly find a nice range where the colors look boosted, but they look beautiful and real. Let's bring that to 0. Now let me just do a quick reminder with the vibrance once more. I'm going to bring it down all the way to the left so that we zero it out. That's what the colors look like, right? They're there, just very muted. But watch what happens when we do this with saturation. When we go all the way down to the left with saturation, we have now removed every bit of color from our squares. We now have a black and white image, and it's just changing in how bright the square is or how dark the square is based on where the original color started. But saturation will remove all the color out when we go to the left. If we go all the way to the right, that gets bright, right? Those colors are super saturated right now. And that affects the realism and that affects the quality of the color. It really reduces the quality of the color. So this is why we never want to bring saturation up too high. I would bring this down much lower, probably somewhere in the nature of maybe 15 to 25, plus 15 to plus 25 on the slider. And that would be a pretty good range for the saturation. Now, generally speaking, I won't use saturation here. I will use the vibrance. But what I want you to keep in mind is that because these tools work the way they do, and because they are global adjustments impacting every color in our image, we have to be very careful. Some colors, as we add vibrance or add saturation, some colors will become oversaturated more quickly than others. So this is why we have to really proceed with caution when using these tools. Okay, so now that we understand the global tools for changing colors, let's go down into the color mixer and the point color tools so that we can take a look at how we can further manipulate our colors inside of Lightroom Classic. So the first thing that we're going to look at is the mixer tool. Now we can look at this a couple of different ways. So I want to show you the different ways we can view the mixer tool. It doesn't change the functionality at all. It only changes how we're going to see it and where the sliders are going to appear. So the first way that we can do this, you will see that there is a hue, saturation, and luminance, right? That's what HSL stands for. And of course, let's just go over what that means exactly. So hue, of course, is talking about the same shade of a color. So for instance, we have these green tones over here. Well, this middle square is a different hue compared to the square all the way to the left. It's a different hue compared to the square all the way to the right. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about the hue of a color. We're talking about the same color, just a different shade. Saturation, as we were just talking about, is picking a particular hue and then either adding more saturation to that color or taking saturation out of that color. And lastly, we have luminance. So again, this refers to a specific hue or shade of a color that we've selected. But with luminance, if we go to the right, we're going to make that color brighter. And if we go to the left with our slider, we're going to make that color darker. So that is the luminance portion of it. So how we can view this is we can either just click on the hue, saturation, or luminance. And when we do that, we will see the 8 color banks underneath that particular feature. So now we've done hue. Now we could make whatever adjustments we want. Then we could go to saturation. Then we could go to luminance, and we can make whatever edits we want to make as we go through those. The way I like to see it, and the way you may want to see it too, is by clicking the word all over here. This is going to allow us to see the hue, the saturation, and the luminance all on one screen. Now, typically, I just like to have it there in front of me because I just find it to be more efficient when editing than clicking on each of these individually. The other way that we can display the HSL is if we go up here and click on these down arrows, you see we have HSL selected, but we can also select color. So with the color, what we can do, if we go over here and click the rainbow circle, we're going to see those same 8 color banks we just saw on the page before. But now, instead of it being broken out into the 8 color banks by hue, saturation, and luminance, it's going to be broken out by color. And under each color, we'll have the hue, saturation, and luminance adjustments for that color. If you don't like this particular look, you can do it specifically by color. So if we wanted to just deal with the greens, we can, instead of viewing all the colors, we could just click on the green circle. This is just going to let us see the green, and we can adjust the hue, saturation, and luminance from here. So this is how we can view the HSL panel. Let's go back to our initial HSL where we can see all 3 here. The HSL panel allows us to edit colors a little bit differently than when we were talking about the global adjustments, right? Because now we can edit just the greens, or we can edit just the blues, or we can edit just the magentas. The problem with HSL is that if we move this green slider in any direction, we are going to change every tone of green in our photos. Now, that may be just fine in many different circumstances, but there may be times when we don't want that. Maybe we only want to affect the green that's in the center square, right? Maybe we don't want the greens to the right or the greens to the left. We don't want any other green tone other than the one in this center square to be impacted. Well, that is where the point color is going to come into play for us. But before we go to that, let's finish up our conversation on HSL. Let's take a look at what happens when we move the green of the hue. So we can change these green tones. And as we go to the left, we bring in that more yellow. And as we go to the right, we bring in that more teal. So we can do whatever we want here to change the hue of our greens. But the point that I want you to take away from this is that every time we do this, we're impacting every single green tone in our image. Same thing with saturation. If we come down here to change the saturation of our greens, it's affecting every green that's in the image. And lastly, we're taking a look at the luminance. And every time we change the darkness or brightness of our greens in our image, we are affecting every color of green in our photo. There is another way that we can change each of the hue, saturation, and luminance settings. You will see that by each category, hue, we have a little dot, saturation, we have a little dot, and luminance, we have a little dot. So if we were to just click on that dot and come out onto our image here, our photo, we can click on whatever green we want, and we will click the left mouse button, and then we will drag up and down. Now, what you're going to see, since I picked this dot from the hue, as I move this dot up and down here, you will see sliders that are within this color range moving over here. So watch what happens as I click and drag up. You can see that we're going to that more teal color, and you can see the slider moving. And as I come down, it's going to the left, and we're bringing in more of those yellow colors, right? So that's what we just saw when I moved the slider. But this is yet another way that you can change the hue, saturation, and luminance. This can come in handy if you are editing a photo and maybe there is something in your photo, you're not sure exactly what color ranges are in it. Rather than try to adjust the sliders, you can use this little tool that I just showed you. You can put the tool on that and then drag it up or down to see how it's impacted and see how you want to make that edit. So that can be where it comes in really helpful. I really don't personally use this at all. It's not a tool that I have found to be overly useful, but I could see it being more useful in like landscape photography or something along those lines, maybe even some portraiture photography. But for wildlife photography, I don't personally use that tool. This is something that you can experiment with and see if you find any value in it. That is HSL. So what happens now, like I was saying, if we want to adjust this green, but we don't want to adjust all of the other colors? How do we drill down to get more precision out of controlling our hue, saturation, and our luminance? Well, let's take a look at the point color. And we're just going to click on the point color right up here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this swatch. And this is what it's going to look at when we come in. So now what Lightroom wants us to do is it wants us to click on this little eyedropper. And now we can take this eyedropper out and we can click anywhere in our photo to narrow down a specific color range. So let's take a look at this middle green. I'm going to click there. And when I do, did you see what happened there? I'm going to hit Control Z to undo it. Watch what happens when I click on this. You can see that we have a rainbow of color over here to the right side of our screen, right, in the point color tool. But once I click on it, it's going to change that into all of the green that's within that range of that square. So now that we have the green selected and we have a color range, what we want to look at is how can we pinpoint this color even more so we're not impacting the rest of the greens? Well, we can come down here and we can do a hue shift. Boy, this kind of looks a lot like the HSL color tone, right? That we moved. But if you notice something about the colors, what are you noticing? Well, the colors aren't shifting as much. I want you to look at this far right square right here. When I take the hue and go all the way to the left, that still stays in the green tone, right? We still have a green square there. If I were to go back to the mixer tool and I were to bring down the green, wow, that brought in a full yellow. So that was a bigger shift with the HSL. Let's go back again to the point color. So you can see simply by selecting a green, we've already narrowed down the green colors in our photo that are going to be changed or impacted by a hue shift. The same will hold true with saturation, right? These changes are not going to be as dramatic as they were in the HSL tones because, again, we're drilling down a little further and choosing a specific green range. So that is how this is going to work up here. Just like the HSL, we can change the colors, but you can see that the other greens are still being impacted. We want to drill it down even more. We don't want them to be impacted. So we're going to come down here to the range slider and then these tools here where we look at hue range, saturation range, and luminance range. One of your best friends when using this tool is going to be this box right here, visual range. We're going to click on that. And wow, look at what happens. All the colors disappear except for the greens, right? But everything else has gone to essentially black and white or some version of that. Reason being is that the colors that are now in the black, white, or gray scales, these colors are no longer in the range of the green that we selected. Okay, so we are just excluding those colors out of our range. So what we're going to do now is we can go up here and we can use this tool to change the range. If we go to the right, we're going to introduce more greens into our range. And if we go to the left, we're going to introduce less greens into our range. And you can kind of see that as I'm sliding this tool and I'm holding it, right? See how the greens have increased when I brought it to 100, and when I go to 0, see how the range decreases. Now this tool is okay, but there's a better way of reducing our range, and that is by changing the parameters down here. These boxes represent the range of green in our hue. This box represents the range of greens in our saturation. This box changes the range of greens in our luminance. So we can change this by dragging these sliders in, and we can narrow this down. So we can really limit the range of colors that we're going to get out of our green. And now, if we go back over to our color grid here, you can see that we have narrowed it down to just the single green square. All of the other greens will be unaffected by anything we do now with the hue shift, the saturation shift, or the luminance shift. We can now make this shift of hue, saturation, and luminance to just a specific color. This gives us tremendous control in our photos. Remember, HSL, when we move the green slider, it was impacting every green tone throughout our entire photo or our entire image. But with point color, we can use these tools to eliminate many of the green tones and just nail it down to the specific green tone that we want to target. With that being said, let's jump into a real photo to see how this would work. Let's go to the Osprey picture here. This is a photo with a lot of green in the background. Well, let's take a look at what we can do if we go in and say, all right, let's pick this green. And we want to focus on the greens that are in this particular range. Well, let's click our visualize here so that we can kind of see the greens. You can see the osprey and some of the other colors that don't fall within this green range are now black and white, right? We have black and white through here. The osprey has no color. All those colors have been eliminated. Anything that we see that's green right now falls within the range of being edited. So maybe that's good. Maybe it's not. Maybe we want to bring down the hue range a little bit. We just want to tighten that up. We want to reduce the tolerance. Maybe we want to bring the saturation in a little bit. And you can see as I do this, we are getting rid of some of those green tones. And maybe we just want to bring in the luminance. Okay, so now we can come up here and we can do our hue, saturation, and luminance sliders to get these colors where we want it. Where do we want these? Do we want them to be a little bit more yellow, or do we want them to have a little bit more green vibrance to them? And I'm gonna shift that hue a little bit more to the right. Now we're gonna say, all right, do we want to take the saturation out, or do we want to add in saturation? And you can see right here, this is a good example of how quickly saturation can ruin your colors, right? I'm going up. Saturation is ruined right here, right? It's completely ruined right here. And we are at 56. So we want to bring that way down, probably to somewhere around 20. And then do we want to make it a little darker or a little brighter by changing the luminance slider? And I'm going to go a little bit darker because a little darker green will make it look a little richer, and that'll be good. So now we can unclick this and we'll be back to our original image, right? With that specific point color that we just edited. You want to see what it looks like before and after? We go up to this little eyeball here. And if we just click and hold this with our left mouse button, we're going to see the original image. When I let go, we're going to see what the image looks like after we did our point color. So if I click and hold, there's the original image. You can see that those greens are lighter. When I let go, you can see now that they have some more saturation and the greens have become richer. Here's another great aspect about the point color tool. Here's the swatch, right, that came up when we picked on this color initially. But that's not the only green in this photo. If we come down to the left-hand side of this, we have some darker greens going on. So we could take our eyedropper and we can add another swatch up there by clicking on this. Now look at, now we have another swatch here. So what are we going to do? Well, we're going to go out and we're going to click visualize the range. You can now see that these colors are falling a little bit more underneath those teal colors, and we can see by what's highlighted, what's colored, what range of colors are going to be affected by what we selected, by what we targeted. Well, maybe we want that to be here, or maybe we want to narrow down that color a little bit more. I think this is pretty much okay. So I'm going to take a look at what we got going on here. I don't want to make them more teal. I'm probably going to shift those a little bit more to the green side. And then what happens when we do the saturation? Maybe add just a smidge of saturation, maybe like +5, and then darken it or make it a little bit brighter. I don't mind it being a little bit darker because it's kind of in the shadows. So I'm going to keep the darkness at about -8, but we made it a little bit more green and took it away from the teal color. Okay, so that's where we're going to leave this particular swatch. So I'm going to unclick the visualize, and now we're going to take a look at the before and after with these two colors targeted. So if I click and hold, that's our original image. When I let go, this is the new image. And you can see that what we did down here in the left-hand corner is very subtle. That is okay. That's what we want to have happen with our colors. We only took the color from a more teal color to a more green color, but it was subtle in how we did it. So take a look at that left-hand corner. Here's the original. here's now. There's the original, here's now. So this is how we can go about targeting colors in our images to really fine tune our edits. All right, guys, that is it for this particular video. You now have all the knowledge that you need to use the color mixer and to use this point color tool. I want you to go just take any wildlife photo you have, and of course, try to make it a raw image. You probably see better effects and better results by using a raw image as opposed to a JPEG where things are more baked in. So use a raw image, but go in and play with these tools. We see a lot of greens in wildlife, so that's why I wanted to use this photo. But play with the point color tool and learn how to manipulate these colors. It's only going to take you a couple of times to do this, and you will have it down. Use this video as a reference. Have it right next to you. Stop it, pause it, rewind it. Do whatever you need to do. It'll walk you through everything you need to know. All right, there you have it. Best of luck with this first lesson and manipulating your color. And I look forward to seeing you guys in the next video. If you like this video, if you thought it was helpful, please consider subscribing to the channel. And I look forward to seeing you guys in the next one, where we're going to start talking about the calibration panel inside of Lightroom. But until then, take care.